Sir, I don't care how much money you claim to have or what your boarding pass says. This cabin is for first-class passengers only. And you, clearly, are not supposed to be here, snapped Chloe Hastings, the lead flight attendant, her voice sharp enough to slice through the quiet hum of Delta Flight 384, the moment the words left her mouth. The entire first-class cabin turned into a pressure chamber of silent stares, awkward glances, and half-frozen expressions. A businessman halfway through his mimosa paused. Another lowered his newspaper with narrowed eyes. Row 3 leaned forward just slightly. Some were stunned. Others nodded in quiet agreement. The target of her public scolding, a black man in his 40s, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, didn't say a word. He sat still in seat 2A, eyes steady, hands folded, no signs of aggression, no raised voice, nothing to justify the humiliation. And yet, here he was, being treated like a trespasser in a space he paid to occupy. But before we get into what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and if this story moves you, with anger, pride, or even curiosity, like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It was a clear Thursday morning in Atlanta. Terminal B was busy but orderly. Delta was moving flights like clockwork. At Gate B5, passengers began boarding Flight 384 to New York. Among them was Nathaniel Brooks, 47 years old. He wasn't the kind of man who made an entrance. He didn't wear flashy brands or draw attention with assistance or carry on chaos. No. Nathaniel moved with quiet confidence. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, leather briefcase in hand, no jewelry except for a wedding band and a simple watch. He gave the gate agent a soft, "Good morning," scanned his ticket, and made his way down the jet bridge. Nathaniel had been flying for more than 20 years, domestically, internationally, commercial, private. He knew how this worked. Today's trip was important. He was headed to a closed-door meeting with executives in Manhattan about a $1.6 billion strategic acquisition, a majority stake in an airline holding group that happened to own a significant share of Delta. The irony? He wasn't just a passenger. He was potentially their future owner. But Nathaniel wasn't one to use power as a shield. He wanted to see how he'd be treated on a normal flight, dressed plainly, traveling alone, without sending advance notice. It wasn't a test for them, but maybe it should have been. As he stepped into the first-class cabin and located seat 2A, a few eyes scanned him, not with curiosity, more like suspicion. He gave a polite nod to the elderly woman in 1B, stored his bag in the overhead bin, and took his seat. That's when she approached, Chloe Hastings. Blonde bun tight enough to hold tension, blazer sharp, voice sharper. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" she asked, without even a hello. Nathaniel nodded and handed over his phone, the digital ticket glowing on the screen. She studied it longer than necessary, then gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is for first class," she said, flatly. "Yes, it is," Nathaniel replied calmly. "Seat 2A. "Just one moment," she said, already walking away before he could respond. Nathaniel watched her retreat down the aisle, then turned to look out the window, unfazed. He'd seen this before, too many times. 2 rows back, a white man in his 50s wearing a gold watch leaned toward the aisle. His name was Bradley Kent, and his voice dripped with condescension. "Guess first class is getting more inclusive," he muttered with a smirk. The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably. Nathaniel didn't look his way. He didn't need to. Chloe returned a minute later, now with a younger flight attendant trailing behind her, Lisa Tran, by the name tag. She looked uncomfortable, unsure. Chloe, on the other hand, looked like she was ready to draw a line in the sand. "Sir, I'm afraid we're having trouble verifying your seat in the system. I'll need you to come with me so we can sort this out." "No need," Nathaniel said evenly. "You can sort it out while I remain seated. My ticket is paid, confirmed, and accurate." Chloe's voice hardened. "If you don't comply, I'll have to call airport security, and I'd rather not escalate this." That's when it all shifted. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. Instead, he calmly reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and placed a call. "Camille," he said, "I'm at Gate B5, Flight 384. Bring the file. You know which one." He ended the call without another word. No anger, just precision. Chloe blinked. "Excuse me? Who was that?" "My assistant," Nathaniel said. "She'll be here shortly." "That's not necessary," Chloe said quickly, her confidence flickering just for a moment. But it was too late. The mood had changed. A few passengers were now filming openly. Others looked away in shame. And Nathaniel Brooks? He remained seated, calm, grounded, and waiting. Because some battles don't need shouting, just presence. And this one had just begun. The silence in first class wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud, thick with tension, like a thunderstorm building behind every stair. Chloe Hastings stood frozen in the aisle, her body stiff, her lips pressed tightly as she tried to regain control of a situation that had clearly slipped from her grasp. She had just been told, calmly but firmly, that an assistant was on the way, and that one sentence from the man in 2A, "She'll be here shortly," carried more weight than any of the policy scripts she'd memorized during training. But Chloe wasn't ready to fold. Not yet. "Sir," she said again, voice still sharp but now laced with nerves. "This delay is going to hold up the entire flight. We need you to step out so we can clear this up with the gate agent." Nathaniel Brooks didn't budge. He sat in perfect stillness, a quiet mountain in a storm of small, brittle voices. "I paid for this seat," he said evenly. "I arrived early. I boarded without issue. If there's a problem, it's not with me. It's with your assumptions." There was no anger in his voice, just clarity, across the aisle. Bradley Kent let out a dry laugh and shook his head, clearly amused by the drama. "If I pulled a stunt like this, I'd be on a no-fly list by now," he mumbled. Chloe didn't correct him. She didn't say anything to him at all. She just hovered near Nathaniel, trying to decide whether to escalate or back off. But before she could make that call, a passenger in row 3, Renee Collins, a journalist for a progressive publication, pressed record on her phone and began quietly filming. Her lens captured everything: the body language, the refusal to look Nathaniel in the eye, the unease spreading through the cabin. Chloe noticed the phone but said nothing. Her priority was control. Optics could wait. "Let me speak to your supervisor," Nathaniel said calmly. Chloe hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her tablet. "The cabin is my responsibility, sir." "Then make a responsible decision," he replied, turning to face her now. "Or let someone else do it." Chloe's jaw clenched, but before she could respond, Nathaniel's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen. One text. "Arrived at Gate B5. On my way." He set the phone down on the tray table and leaned back into the seat, the way someone does when they know they're not going anywhere. The air in the cabin grew heavier. Even the hum of the engines seemed quieter than usual. And just for a moment, Nathaniel drifted, not away from the moment, but into it. His eyes softened, not with weakness, but with memory. He was 21 the first time he'd boarded a plane. He wasn't wearing a suit then. He was wearing a second-hand dress shirt, 2 sizes too big, and shoes with soles so thin he could feel the airport tiles beneath them. He'd been flying to New Jersey for a scholarship interview, one that would determine whether he'd get to leave behind a life of sleeping in his car and working double shifts at a gas station just to eat. He remembered the look the flight attendant gave him back then, too. Half pity, half suspicion. He remembered being asked if he was in the wrong seat. And the seat was right. But the assumption was always the same. You don't belong here. That was over 25 years ago. And yet, here he was again. Same flight path, same uniform, same assumption, a different seat, but the same judgment. He blinked once, grounding himself back into the present. "Sir," Lisa, the younger attendant, said softly as she stepped closer. "Would you like some water?" Her voice was different, gentler, sincere. Nathaniel looked up at her. Her eyes flicked nervously toward Chloe, who was still standing a few feet away, arms crossed. "Thank you," Nathaniel said with a small nod. "Yes, I would." Lisa turned, grateful for a reason to move. Chloe snapped quietly. "That's not procedure." "Neither is this," Lisa murmured, and continued to the galley. Chloe's eyes narrowed. That crack in her control was growing, and for the first time, passengers began shifting in their seats, not just from discomfort, but curiosity. First class wasn't just watching, it was waiting. They'd all seen arguments on planes before, but this wasn't a shouting match. This was something else. Quiet, controlled, unsettling. Bradley Kent pulled out his phone, pretending to check email, but he was recording too. He wanted to capture whatever lesson this man in 2A was about to learn. He still thought the ending belonged to him. At that exact moment, the flight deck door cracked open, and Captain Dennis Clark stepped out. Early 60s, gray at the temples, calm demeanor. He surveyed the cabin quickly, sensing the tension. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Chloe turned, a little too fast. "Captain, I'm handling a seating issue. This passenger." "Mr. Brooks," the captain interrupted, eyes lighting with recognition. "Nathaniel Brooks, from the Heiress Leadership Forum in Dallas last fall?" Nathaniel stood now, not aggressively, but respectfully. "Yes, sir. Good to see you again." Chloe's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Dennis extended a hand, and they shook briefly. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you flew private?" "Sometimes I do," Nathaniel replied. "But I like to see how the real systems work, without filters." Captain Clark turned to Chloe. "Is there a problem here?" Chloe stammered. I just thought. His name wasn't matching on the iPad and..." Her voice faded. She knew she had lost control. "He's exactly where he's supposed to be," the captain said, firmly but kindly. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Chloe nodded stiffly. Lisa returned with the water and handed it to Nathaniel, who nodded in thanks. "Thank you, Lisa." She gave a tiny smile, the first she'd shown all morning. As Nathaniel sat down again, calm and composed, his phone buzzed one more time. He didn't even need to read it. He knew Camille had arrived. The clock was still ticking, and the real reckoning was just about to begin. There was something about the click of polished heels down the jet bridge that made even the cabin crew glance toward the front of the aircraft. Not fast, not loud, just steady, controlled, like someone who didn't need to run because the room would wait for them. That someone was Camille Harris. And as she stepped through the aircraft door into first class, you could feel the air adjust. She wasn't tall, but she stood like someone who commanded height. Black slacks, pressed white blouse, navy blazer with gold trim, ID badge clipped to the lapel, and a thin leather case under one arm. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, sharp as glass, scanned the room once before settling directly on Chloe Hastings. "Mr. Brooks," Camille said, giving Nathaniel a respectful nod. I have the file you asked for. Chloe blinked, then instinctively stepped between Camille and Nathaniel as if trying to preserve whatever control she still imagined she had. Excuse me, ma'am. This is a secure cabin. You can't just walk in here without authorization. Camille raised one brow and calmly flipped open her ID badge. I'm Camille Harris, Executive Vice President of Brooks & Stone Capital. Then, after the briefest pause, we're currently conducting final stage due diligence on a proposed acquisition of 18.5% stake in Delta Air Holdings. The words landed like thunder in a silent canyon. Bradley Kent stopped mid-scroll on his phone. Lisa Tran turned slowly from the galley. The captain, still standing a few feet behind, folded his arms across his chest. And Chloe? She froze, because in a matter of 5 seconds, the entire power dynamic in that cabin had flipped on its head. I wasn't aware of any visitors, Chloe said, voice cracking slightly. You don't need to be, Camille replied, her tone even but firm. This wasn't a PR check. We're evaluating culture, equity, and leadership integrity, real-world interactions, not polished tours. She turned to Nathaniel. May I? Please, he said. Camille stepped forward, opened the folder, and removed a thick report. The front page had the Delta logo stamped on it, with the heading Phase 3, Behavioral Observations and Incident Readings. She placed it on the tray table in front of Nathaniel, and let her fingers rest there for a second. Then she added, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, the internal bias audit wasn't scheduled to begin until next quarter, but apparently, it started itself today. A low murmur swept across the cabin. Chloe's face flushed, a pale red crawling up from her collarbone. She turned toward the captain for backup, but he didn't move. He didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. Lisa stepped forward. Would you like me to bring a printed manifest to confirm the booking? She offered, her voice cautious. Chloe didn't answer, so the captain did. That won't be necessary, he said. I've flown with Mr. Brooks before. He belongs here. And just like that, the question of whether Nathaniel had the right seat became irrelevant, because the room finally saw him, not as a man to question, but as a man to reckon with. Bradley tried to recover, scoffing under his breath. So now we're letting CEOs test the help? Real professional? Camille turned, slowly. Mr. Kent, Bradley Kent. Interesting, she said. You submitted a funding proposal to our New York office in 2019, declined due to ethics red flags. Internal memo said your project lacked transparency. Bradley went silent. Camille didn't flinch. She looked around the cabin. Let's be very clear. Mr. Brooks didn't test anyone today. He boarded quietly, showed his ticket, and took his seat. What you saw, what you chose to do, was the test. Chloe tried one last grasp. There must have been a system error. The iPad wasn't showing his seat confirmed when I first scanned. No, Nathaniel said for the first time since Camille arrived. You didn't see an error. You saw me, and you made a decision, one that had nothing to do with policy. That line didn't come from a place of anger. It came from truth, pure and plain. And truth doesn't shout. It settles. In the silence that followed, something subtle shifted in the cabin. Passengers who hadn't looked his way before now lowered their eyes. Not out of shame, exactly, but out of recognition. That quiet realization that they'd witnessed something ugly, and perhaps silently condoned it. Chloe finally stepped back. I apologize, sir, she said, forcing each word like it weighed too much. If there was any misunderstanding— There wasn't, Nathaniel interrupted, his voice still composed. But your apology is noted. Camille turned to the captain. We'll be including this incident in our report. No names will be released until it's reviewed internally. but I'd strongly recommend proactive discipline before the press makes that decision for you." Captain Clark nodded solemnly. "Understood." Camille took a final glance around the cabin. "Mr. Brooks, I'll wait near the gate. Let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you, Camille," he said. She left the same way she came in, measured, efficient, and completely in control. The moment she disappeared from view, Chloe exhaled like someone trying not to cry. Nathaniel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his seatbelt and looked out the window again. The jet bridge was about to retract, and every eye in first class knew this flight wasn't going to be ordinary. Not anymore, because this wasn't just about a seat. This was about what it meant to be seen, and what it cost people when they're not. And though no one said it out loud, they all understood. The story of this flight had already begun writing itself, and not one of them was ready for how it would end. For a long moment after Camille exited the cabin, the first-class section sat in a thick, vibrating silence, the kind that doesn't happen by accident, but by consequence. Chloe stood frozen near the galley curtain, her lips tight, eyes darting from passenger to passenger, from Captain Clark to Lisa, and finally, reluctantly, back to Nathaniel Brooks, who had said almost nothing all morning yet somehow changed everything. Lisa stood quietly nearby, her hands fidgeting with a drink napkin, clearly shaken. The passengers had stopped pretending to be distracted. Now. They watched openly, like a courtroom gallery that had just realized the defendant might actually be the judge. Chloe cleared her throat, but before she could say another word, Renee Collins in row 3 stood up. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and steady, the way a journalist rises when she's not just telling a story but becoming part of it. Her phone was still recording. "Excuse me," she said, locking eyes with Chloe. "I think the passengers deserve to know what just happened here. You accused this man of being in the wrong seat, twice. You tried to remove him from the plane, and now that you've been corrected, we're expected to act like it never happened?" Chloe opened her mouth, but Renee kept going. "I've been filming since you called security. Every word, every reaction. And when this flight lands, I'll be filing a formal report with the airline, with the FAA, and with my readers. And I have a lot of readers." She held up the phone, still capturing everything. Bradley Kent scoffed. "Oh, great. Another internet activist with a camera." Renee turned toward him calmly. "No, Mr. Kent. I'm an investigative journalist. I report on corporate ethics, transportation policy, and racial bias in regulated industries. You're part of a pattern. So is she." She nodded toward Chloe, whose face had gone pale. Captain Clark stepped forward. "Ms. Collins," he said firmly but respectfully, "I understand your concern. Let me assure you, this incident will be handled seriously and internally." "Respectfully, Captain," Renee replied. "Internal policies are exactly why people like Mr. Brooks keep ending up in situations like this. It's always internal, always behind closed doors, until someone shows the world what happens in broad daylight." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't waver. It just stood. Nathaniel looked over at her and gave the smallest nod of gratitude. Quiet, almost imperceptible. But in that moment, it said more than any speech ever could. Chloe stepped back, visibly shaken now. I was following protocol. The iPad didn't show the correct passenger ID." "Then why didn't you doubt the system when the passenger was white?" Renee asked. "Why did the only person you questioned, the only person you tried to remove, happen to be the black man in a suit who said nothing, did nothing, and followed every rule?" The cabin stirred. Passengers murmured. A woman in row 1 whispered to her husband. A man in 4C lowered his phone, visibly uncomfortable. For the first time, Chloe looked like she wanted to disappear. Captain Clark gently put a hand on her shoulder. "Chloe," he said softly, "why don't you step into the galley for a moment?" She obeyed without speaking, just slipped through the curtain and vanished. Lisa stepped in quietly and began offering bottled water to the front rows. "Mr. Brooks," she said gently, "can I get you anything?" "No, thank you," Nathaniel replied, "but I appreciate your tone." She nodded and moved down the aisle, cheeks flushed but purposeful. Meanwhile, Renee sat back down and began uploading the video. The title wrote itself: "Black CEO Harassed in First Class. Watch what happens next." Within seconds, the upload bar was crawling forward. She posted it to her professional account, tagged the airline, and used hashtags like First Class Bias, Flight 384, and Delta Gate B5. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did Nathaniel. He didn't ask her to post it. He never raised his voice, never demanded justice. But this moment, this quiet resistance, was no longer confined to the walls of the plane. It was moving. It was going somewhere. Across the aisle, Bradley muttered, "This is ridiculous. I pay to avoid this kind of drama, not sit front row for it." Nathaniel turned to face him for the first time. "What kind of drama, exactly?" he asked calmly. "The kind where a man quietly boards a flight and sits in the seat he paid for?" Bradley sneered. "The kind where people pull the race card every time someone asks them a question?" "No one pulled anything," Nathaniel replied. "But I've been asked the same question in boardrooms, banks, hotel lobbies, and now 35,000 feet in the air. And the answer never seems to matter." The cabin grew still again. No one defended Bradley. Even he realized he'd gone too far. He looked away. Nathaniel leaned back in his seat and looked toward the window, eyes half closed, not in anger, but reflection. It wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. And after decades of moving through rooms where he had to prove his right to be there, he was tired, but never empty. Camille texted, "Video already past 100K views. Newsroom pinged me. Want to respond?" Nathaniel typed back, "Not yet. Let it breathe." Meanwhile, in the crew area, Chloe sat with her hands clasped, her head set on the floor. The quiet buzz of a reprimand awaited. The captain didn't scold her. He didn't need to. She'd watched her credibility evaporate in real time, and the worst part? She knew she'd caused it. Lisa approached quietly and set a small plastic cup of water beside her. "They'll probably suspend me," Chloe whispered. Lisa didn't answer. She just looked toward the curtain and said, "Maybe next time. Listen before you lead." Back in row 2, Nathaniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small journal. No branding, just leather. He opened it, scribbled something on a clean page, then closed it again. Across from him, the mood had shifted. He wasn't the man they questioned anymore. He was the one they were now trying to learn from. And it wasn't over yet. The wheels were still on the ground. But this story was already airborne. The cabin lights had dimmed slightly, but no one was sleeping, no one reading, and no one pretending anymore. Because whatever flight they thought they were boarding that morning had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't turbulence from the sky, but from inside the cabin, from everything being reshaped in real time. Camille stood again, this time not just as a quiet executive, but as a clear authority figure. She returned to Nathaniel's row holding a silver laptop, flipped it open on the tray table, and turned the screen toward him. Passengers craned their necks. The screen displayed a PDF titled Brooks and Stone Capital, Preliminary Cultural Findings, Delta Air Holdings, Internal Use Only. It was supposed to be confidential, but as Camille scrolled down, she stopped at a heading in bold, recurring patterns of racial profiling within premium customer service divisions. It was page 17 of a 64-page document. Everyone could see the words. Camille said calmly, This document was meant for internal review only. But since it seems first class has become the review board, I figured we'd all take a look together. Her tone wasn't angry. It was composed, clinical. Over a 3-year period, between 2021 and 2024, Delta's internal compliance team recorded over 313 passenger discrimination claims linked to race or perceived social class. 72% of those occurred in first-class or priority boarding areas. The majority involved Black or Latino passengers questioned about the validity of their tickets or loyalty status. Only 14% of those claims resulted in formal retraining or disciplinary action. Fewer than 4% resulted in termination. No one said a word. The numbers hung in the air like smoke. Chloe, still seated by the galley, closed her eyes. Camille continued, her voice steady. Today's incident fits those patterns with almost clinical precision. Passenger of color, alone, traveling professionally, profiled despite a confirmed ticket, publicly humiliated, and escalated based on emotion, not policy. Renee whispered from her seat. You can't make that up. Nathaniel hadn't said a word yet, but his silence had become the center of the cabin. Everything rotated around it. Camille closed the laptop and turned to Captain Clark, who had returned from the cockpit after speaking briefly with the ground operations manager. He stepped forward now and addressed Chloe directly, not with rage, but with finality. Chloe Hastings, effective immediately. You're suspended from active flight duty pending full review. You'll be escorted from the aircraft upon arrival by base leadership. Chloe didn't argue. She didn't even look up. For the first time in the flight, she had nothing left to defend herself with. Not her voice, not her uniform, not even the illusion of control. Lisa quietly stepped in, taking her position near the front. She looked like she'd aged a few years since boarding. Meanwhile, Bradley Kent shifted uncomfortably in his seat across the aisle. He could feel it. His moment was coming. Camille didn't let him wait long. She turned toward him and said, Mr. Kent, we've also pulled your name from our investor proposal records. He looked confused, then defensive. What does that have to do with anything? Camille explained without blinking. In 2019, you submitted a commercial real estate development plan to our office in Manhattan. It was flagged for unethical zoning tactics and manipulation of contract language involving minority tenants. You were blacklisted from future funding rounds. The cabin went dead silent. Bradley sank further into his seat. That's private information, he muttered. Not anymore, Renee said from 2 rows back. Welcome to transparency. Nathaniel finally spoke. Not to attack, not to gloat, but to deliver the line that everyone would remember. You see, the thing about first class isn't the seat, he said, voice calm, full. It's the assumption, who you assume belongs here, and who you assume doesn't. He paused. You didn't see me. You saw what you expected me to be. And when the truth didn't match that expectation, you tried to erase it. A hush fell again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was clarity. He continued. There was a time I would have gotten off this plane. I would have apologized for making people uncomfortable just by existing. But I've spent my life proving my presence doesn't require anyone's permission. And today, I stayed in my seat. Not because I needed to, but because somebody else watching needs to know they can. At that moment, Renee's phone buzzed. She glanced down. Her video had crossed 3.1 million views. Major news networks were now reposting it. Camille's team began fielding calls from the Associated Press and CBS. The airline's public relations director sent a message marked urgent. Delta's stock had dipped 1.7% since boarding, but none of that noise was louder than the silence of passengers processing what they'd just witnessed. An older white woman in 1C, who had said nothing all flight, turned and softly said, I'm sorry for how they treated you. Nathaniel nodded, kind but firm. Thank you. But don't apologize for them. Just help change it. The plane had yet to take off, but the shift had already happened. Not in altitude, in awareness, in accountability. And though the seatbelt signs were still lit, everyone knew, no matter where this plane landed, they'd never forget what happened before it even left the ground. Nathaniel leaned back, loosened his tie, and for the first time that morning, he smiled, not because justice had been served, but because the truth had finally taken its seat. The plane hadn't even left the gate, but the flight already felt like it had gone 1,000 miles. After Nathaniel's words, spoken not in anger, but in quiet strength, the cabin had sunk into the kind of stillness that only comes after something important has been said. You could hear the rumble of bags being stowed farther back in the aircraft, but up front, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the buzz of devices felt too loud. Nathaniel sat quietly, his hands resting on the closed folder in front of him, the one marked with the future of a multi-billion-dollar deal that no longer felt theoretical. Across from him, Bradley Kent pretended to scroll through emails, but his hands were shaking. The man had run commercial real estate deals for years, but now he looked like someone who'd been found out, not just by Nathaniel or Camille, but by every single person within earshot who now saw him differently. Lisa Tran stood silently near the galley, eyes glancing toward Chloe every few seconds, as if still asking herself whether she could have changed the course of this entire day if she'd spoken sooner. And then, after what felt like an entire chapter turning, Lisa did something no one expected. She stepped forward. Her voice was soft but certain. "Mr. Brooks," she said, hands clasped in front of her. "May I speak with you?" Nathaniel turned, not suspicious, just curious. "Of course. I want to say something, not just to you, but to everyone here, because I didn't speak up when I should have, and I don't want to leave this flight knowing I stood on the wrong side of something so clear." All eyes turned toward her. Lisa inhaled slowly. "I've been a flight attendant for 5 years. I joined during the pandemic, when travel was chaotic and short-staffed and people were scared. And ever since then, I've been told over and over to follow protocol, avoid conflict, and defer to the lead. That's what I did this morning. But somewhere in that, I forgot how to be human first." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "What happened to you wasn't just uncomfortable. It was unfair, and I knew it, and I said nothing. And that's on me." Nathaniel studied her, no emotion on his face. Just silence, the kind that invites truth. Lisa turned slightly toward the passengers. "And to everyone else, you were watching. We all were. But watching isn't the same as witnessing, and witnessing doesn't mean anything if we don't respond. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I promise to be better next time." She bowed her head briefly, then returned to her position. Camille glanced over at Nathaniel, who gave a faint nod, and that was all that needed to be said. Meanwhile, in the jump seat near the galley, Chloe Hastings stared straight ahead, her face, once guarded, now looked blank, like someone realizing that the thing unraveling wasn't just her job, but the version of herself she'd been clinging to. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just sat there, replaying it all behind her eyes, the way she'd dismissed him, the look on passengers' faces, the moment Camille read the report in front of her, the sound of her own voice, now echoing in her memory with something closer to shame. For a long time, Chloe had believed she was the kind of person who followed rules, enforced structure, kept order. But today, for the first time, she saw what happened when you confuse compliance with character. A few seats up, the older woman in 1C, the one who'd offered an apology earlier. rose from her seat and walked slowly back toward Nathaniel. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask. She just reached into her purse, pulled out a small card with soft gold lettering, and placed it gently on his tray table. "I run a national civics education nonprofit," she said kindly. "We're launching a program on dignity and leadership next year. If you ever feel like telling this story to the next generation, they need to hear it." Nathaniel looked down at the card. Then he looked up. "You don't need me to tell it," he said. "You just need to make sure they learn how to listen." She smiled, nodded once, and returned to her seat. Meanwhile, Renee Collins, the journalist whose video had sparked the wave, received an alert on her phone. She leaned forward in her seat. 4.6 million views, she murmured to herself. "That's half a country watching in real time." She turned slightly and added, "They're calling it the 2A moment." That made Nathaniel pause. The 2A moment. He let the words land for a second. A seat number turned symbol. That's how these things work now, he thought. Quiet dignity recorded, uploaded, and reframed into movements. He didn't seek it, but here it was. Anyway. Camille leaned in beside him and whispered, "Board just called. They want your recommendation by end of day." He nodded once. "I already know what it is." "Still want to fly to New York?" she asked. "Yes," he said, almost smiling. "This flight's not over." From the cockpit, the captain's voice came over the speaker, calm, composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're just waiting for final clearance from the ground crew. We'll be pushing back shortly." And then, as if nothing had happened, the cabin returned to its rhythm. Bags stowed, belts buckled, hands folded in laps. But everyone on board knew better, because something had happened. Something real. Something they'd carry with them long after landing. And as the aircraft began to move away from the gate, Nathaniel Brooks closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to remember the moment when staying seated meant more than taking off. It meant rising. The wheels touched down at JFK just after 1:42 p.m., and for the first time since boarding. There was a gentle exhale that moved through the cabin, not relief in the traditional sense, but the slow release that comes after witnessing something that changes you, even if you weren't sure why at the time. As the aircraft taxied toward Gate 17, passengers remained unusually quiet. No one scrambled to open overhead bins. No one stood prematurely. Instead, they sat in something like reverence, like they had shared in a story larger than themselves. Nathaniel Brooks stayed seated, eyes forward, seatbelt still fastened. He didn't need applause. He wasn't searching for attention. His expression said what he'd been saying all day without raising his voice. "I belong here." And now, finally, everyone else knew it too. The captain came over the speaker again, his voice low, measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire flight crew, we'd like to thank you for your patience today. We hope your time aboard Delta Flight 384 gave you a little more than just miles." It was subtle, but everyone heard it. Camille stood in the aisle beside Nathaniel, her phone still buzzing every few seconds. "The video's at 6.3 million views," she said under her breath. "We just got calls from the New York Times and NPR." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Let them talk. I'm done performing." "It's not a performance," she replied. "It's a standard. And you just raised it." He nodded once, and then turned to Lisa, who now stood at the front of the cabin like someone different than who she was when the day began. "Lisa," he said gently. She stepped over. "Yes. Mr. Brooks?" "Thank you," he said. "Not for the water, not for the apology, but for recognizing the moment. While it was still happening." She nodded, lips pressed tight, eyes holding back tears. "I'll never unsee it," she said. Good, Nathaniel replied. That's how change begins, just behind them. Chloe remained seated near the galley, still in uniform, but stripped of authority. She hadn't spoken since the captain formally suspended her. Her face was pale, posture rigid, and for the first time since boarding, she truly looked like someone reckoning with the weight of her own actions. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She simply looked at Nathaniel with eyes that were no longer defensive, just human. He gave her a long, steady look. Then, in a voice only she could hear, he said, "Growth doesn't start with a lesson. It starts with discomfort. Sit with it." That was all. No lectures, no revenge, just truth. As the cabin door opened and the jet bridge locked into place, a Delta base manager waited outside. He stepped into the aircraft, greeted the captain, and made eye contact with Chloe. Wordlessly, she stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked toward the exit. She passed Nathaniel without a word, and he didn't look back. Some passengers watched. Others looked away, but all of them felt something they didn't have words for. Bradley Kent, now quiet for over an hour, finally stood, grabbed his bag, and paused next to Nathaniel. "For what it's worth," he began, his voice scratchy. "Don't," Nathaniel said gently, not unkind. "Let the silence teach you something." Bradley nodded, ashamed, and walked on, one by one. Passengers deplaned, but many stopped to offer something before they left. A touch on the shoulder, a whispered thank you, a look of solidarity. One woman handed Nathaniel a folded note. It read, "My son is 22 and applying to law school. Thank you for reminding me what kind of world I want him to walk into." Finally, Nathaniel rose. He took one last look at seat 2A, the seat where it all began, and then stepped into the jet bridge. Camille followed close behind. As they walked through the terminal, phones rang, heads turned, reporters hovered at a distance. But Nathaniel didn't break stride. He wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was walking through it, owning every step like it was already his. Outside the terminal, a black car waited. Camille opened the door, but before getting in, Nathaniel paused. "Let the board know," he said. "We're postponing the investment review for 90 days. Camille's eyes widened. "That's going to raise questions." "Good," he replied. "Maybe this time, they'll ask the right ones." She smiled, closed the door behind him, and joined him in the back seat. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the stream of yellow taxis and rushing travelers. Inside, Nathaniel stared out the window, not at the city skyline, but at his own reflection. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who once swept floors at the back of a gas station after midnight shifts, the one who was told more than once, "You're not supposed to be here." And yet, here he was, older, wiser, still carrying the weight of being seen last instead of first. But this time, something shifted. This time, he didn't just reclaim his seat, he redefined it. And as the car moved forward, Camille leaned over and asked, "How would you like to respond to the public statement from Delta's CEO?" Nathaniel turned slowly, his answer already formed. "Tell them I'm not here to cancel anyone. I'm here to correct something. And sometimes, correction starts with one person staying seated long enough for the world to stand up." And with that, the story closed. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with a quiet revolution led by a man in seat 2A who never raised his voice, never broke character, and still changed everything. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Sometimes, real change starts with one person choosing to stay seated.